Well, thank you, Joyce and Lilac, for such amazing talks to start this off, and thank you, Shafi and the Simons Institute for hosting this. And yeah, really hearing from the gamut of elephants to plants. And I think, Lilac, you're really going to do a job to the vegetarian movement here, which I hope you should be prepared for. Now there's really nothing left to eat if plants have the consciousness that you're saying. But which actually brings me to this project on sperm whales. As we were mentioning earlier, Shafi, Michael, and I met at Radcliffe, and I came to Radcliffe as I was studying jellyfish. There's even there's an article in the Harvard Gazette called "The Jellyfish Guy," and I was trying to find ways to really show people how interesting jellyfish are and how they could permeate people's hearts. And I couldn't get anybody interested, not even the Radcliffe Fellows. And it was really great when I came across Shane Gero's research on sperm whales. I mean, these are the charismatic megafauna, the essentially Moby Dick, and when Shafi kind of called attention to their sounds and to the potential of machine learning, it got the wheels turning, and really is the glue that brought this group together. So it's a great honor to introduce Shane Gero, who runs the Dominica Sperm Whale Project, as well as Pratyusha Sharma, who's at MIT CSAIL and is in the research group of Daniela Roos, and is also working with Jacob Andreas and Antonio Torabla, who are heavily involved in this project. So this essentially is Shane planted the seed for this 15 years ago, and we're now beginning to apply some of these advanced machine learning tools. So Shane and Pratyusha, why don't you take it away, and thank you.
Hi everybody, let me screen share. Is everybody able to see my title slide? Yeah, great. Okay. Oops, why did that go away? Sorry. So hi, my name is Shane Gero, and I'm the biology lead for Project SETI, and I'm affiliated with the Marine Bioacoustics Lab at Aarhus University in Denmark, and the biology department at the Dalhousie University here in Canada. And as David said, I'm the founder of the Dominica Sperm Whale Project. So before we dive into sperm whale communication, I just wanted to take a quick step backwards. Language has really been sort of a unifying and divisive force among human populations. And in our human case, language has helped us to solve a really important problem of with whom to spend time and who to cooperate with, by identifying sort of other strangers that share similar social norms as behaviors to us. And that's helped lead the way to the evolution of cultural groups and of cultural identity. But on the other hand, wars are often fought over differences as simple as language and the differences that they label that exist between groups. So over the course of history, these divisions have been really important in terms of structuring the geographic spread and the success of different human societies. And I think this plot of the 23 most commonly spoken languages around the world really highlights the divisions that language can have. Now, there's a growing body of work that demonstrates that humans are not the only cultural species and that animal cultural traditions pervade most parts of their lives. In this enormous study, several primatologists summarized the diversity and density, sort of the richness of chimpanzee culture across Africa. So animals, and maybe plants, including bees, birds, and primates, they can learn from each other and pass on acquired knowledge. And in some cases, that's really closely linked with their social identity. So when we talk about decoding the communication of non-human species, it's more than questions about what they're saying to each other and what the properties of those sounds are, or what the structure and rules that govern how they do that. It's really about who they are and why they live together. And it's about solutions to living together for coexistence and ultimately the evolution of complicated societies. And oceanic societies look really different, but provide us with some advantages when we study them. I think the most overlooked reality when we're looking in the ocean as opposed to on land is the ocean is really big and deep and dark and wet. And as a result of living in these giant spaces, many whales and dolphins operate over relatively larger spatial and temporal scales compared to primates or even elephants. And many cover thousands of kilometers, and some are thought to live over 100 years old. And there's very little evidence of territoriality. There's no fighting for a place. So compared to terrestrial species, marine species also experience substantially greater environmental variation over periods of months and longer. So once you sort of take out the predictabilities of daily and seasonal cycles, the noise in a terrestrial environment is very white, whereas in the oceanic environment, it tends to be very red or brown. And this means that the ocean, over longer timescales, creates a situation where you want to learn from each other rather than learning on your own or having behavior be genetically determined. And if you take that with the fact that a lot of whales and dolphins live in long-term stable families with prolonged parental care, there's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other. And so we see a lot of culturally transmitted behavior. And as a result, there's several species that we see that have lots of differences between social groups that we think is due to learning from each other and social learning. Now, sperm whales have been sperm whales for longer than humanity has walked upright. So they have these really rich social lives and complex communication systems that have arisen. And so therefore, along with the points above about the ocean itself, the cetaceans are a really important taxon for asking questions about the sort of nexus of interaction between communication, social structure, and culture. In particular, given they have cognitive abilities and societies that rival the animals that we study on land. But importantly, they also give us a really interesting dramatic contrast in ecology. Sperm whales are the largest of all of the toothed whales. They have the world's largest brain, physically speaking. They can be found worldwide and share many life traits with the elephants that Joyce has so nicely summarized in her early talk. And so over the last 15 years, I've been focused on a long-term study of sperm whales. I've been following the lives of sperm whale families off the coast of Dominica since 2005 through thousands of hours of observation now. It's really been the first time that anyone's really come to know these animals as individuals, with brothers and sisters and mothers and babysitters, and as families and neighbors. Our population estimate maxes out around 400 individuals, which is broken down into about 30 different families, of which about 16 we know quite well and have followed across years. Now, compared to other sites where sperm whales have been studied, these units show really high residency times. They're spending a lot of time off the coast of Dominica and in the Eastern Caribbean. And that's a huge advantage when you're studying communication. We can reliably see the same animals across days and weeks and months and through years. And we can study them as they age, as they become moms, and across different behavioral contexts. In truth, really, there's been no other population of sperm whales that has been this well characterized. For most individuals, we know their reproductive history, their family relationships, their habitat use around Dominica and the wider islands, their place in a social network, and individual and group-specific vocalizations, and even their little behavioral idiosyncrasies. So this really allows us to ask a lot deeper questions about what it means to be a sperm whale. And so when a sperm whale makes these deep dives to hunt for squid, she's among the deepest and longest divers. She can hold her breath for over an hour and make dives 3 times deeper than most modern nuclear attack submarines. She'll spend 80% of her life in the darkness of the deep ocean, and only about 10 to 15 minutes of every hour in the part of the ocean that light touches. So as a result, her world is dominated by sound. And so just like that, sperm whales have evolved a system of echolocation to see in the dark. And their unique nose houses the world's the largest natural sonar system. And that's allowed them to exploit the deep parts of the ocean that we find even hard to get to. And as a result, sperm whales are a significant part of the ocean ecosystem. Sperm whales eat as much squid as all of human fisheries combined. And whales make these amazing clicks by moving air around their highly evolved heads. And in addition to a bunch of other rarer calls, they create 2 distinct types of clicks, which we believe serve 2 completely different functions. The echolocation clicks here on the top are used to see with sound for navigation and in hunting, and these are among the most intense sounds that any animal can produce. They're produced in excess of 200 decibels and can be heard well over 10 kilometers away. And most of the echolocation energy travels to the head of the whale on the fronts, once through the sperm on the top, and then once through the jump on the bottom. And that creates a clear broadband pulse that's all it is. The Coda clicks that are used in communication and are exchanged in bouts and sequences between two or more whales when they dive together or socialize.
Roger, sorry, there's a sound disturbance. I don't know if other people are hearing it.
Oh no.
I think it's coming from your connection. Are you near the Wi-Fi?
No, I'm on a fixed line. Is it breaking up or is it noisy?
So it sounds like there's another noise underneath you, so you're talking over something. Do you only have one connection open?
You have an external microphone that you're using?
Nope, it's built into my Surface.
Mm-hmm.
It's good now, actually.
Yeah, it actually sounds better now.
Yeah, now it sounds.
Can I not be understood at all, or?
No, just the last second or two.
Oh, okay.
Now it's good. Maybe we continue. If
Okay,
you
yeah.
repeat the last phrase.
Sure, and just someone put up their hand if it comes back. Right, but the second type of click that they make is called a coda click, and they exchange these codas in bouts when two or more animals are together, either when they're diving together or when they're socializing at the surface. And they're virtually never made when animals are alone. Now, the coda clicks, the one on the bottom here, have a more obvious multi-pulsed structure, and that's because the sound actually reflects in multiple times. And it doesn't go down into the jump. And so we were able to see a significant I'm not sure why that would be. I noticed that whenever one of you try to talk, I get the live stream button showing up on my Zoom.
So we are on.
And now, is it better now that everybody is muted? Okay. So you get these different click types, but both share a unique property called the impulse interval, which is a byproduct both of the size of the organ, and that allows us to sort of allometrically be able to measure the whale that's producing it. And that sort of provides a concrete voice cue for us to use if whales are different sizes and the families are small in number. And as it turns out, sperm whale families are matrilineal. Grandmothers, mothers, and daughters will live together for life. They do not migrate north and south like many whales, and they communally raise and defend their family. And it turns out that family is critical to survival. And the sperm whale families in the Caribbean are very small, typically about 7 whales. And they tend to be encountered alone offshore. On any given day, you're working only with a few whales, but we're able to see them every time they come to the surface. And that's really been the key in our ability to develop an understanding of their social lives. Building a family album through photo identification of these animals about who is important in their life. Families also show preferences to other families. And pairs of families that have been together across decades that we call a bond group, which is following from the terminology of elephants that do a similar pattern. But each family has their own way of doing things, and they live in a community of neighboring families, of which this is a small subset. So F and U are a bond pair. These are 2 more bonded pairs of families. And this is the subset of the social network off the coast of Dominica. And they seem to mediate these social relationships with distinct pattern clicks with stereotypic rhythm and tempo that we call codas. And there are 2 main categories of codas. There are regular codas, where the timing between the clicks are all the same, like this 5R coda. And then there are irregular codas where the interclick intervals, or the ICI, is different, like this 1 + 1 + 1 coda. So in the first few hundred meters, as they dive together, they make codas in sort of duet-like sequences before starting their echolocation and splitting up to hunt for squid at depth. And these conversations often include overlapping calls and matching of coda types or coda patterns. So I like to say that there's this elegant complexity to what is apparently a simple system of their exchange. But more often than not, exchanges are far more complex. Coda bouts can last more than half an hour, and social periods where they're all playing together at the surface and making codas can last hours and are filled with codas. So this is an exchange between one of the well-known units of whales. We call them the group of 7, probably the best studied unit of whales anywhere in the world. We spend hundreds of hours just with these animals, and it gives you an idea of the complexity of the exchange and maybe also an ear for the different coda types. And our previous research has shown that the whales exhibit patterns of codas that allow us to discriminate individuals, family units, and what we call clans in these what seem to be nested levels of identity. So at the level of the individual, we found a really variable 5R1 coda, so 5 regularly spaced clicks or close to it, that allowed us to reliably discriminate individual unit members. This is really interesting because it's one of the few coda types that we hear all around the world. And this sort of fits our functional interpretation because you would expect that any population of sperm whales, regardless of where they live, would need to interact at the individual level. It's also interesting because these 5R1 codas often start sequences of codas, so the first calls they make before continuing to speak, and particularly when they're starting dives before they separate, so socially isolate when they go to depth to hunt. Among units in the Caribbean, there are characteristic 4-click codas, so codas with 4 different clicks. And we think these serve to mediate recognition at greater distances when they're deciding whether or not to meet up. And in particular, it would allow for the identification of bond group pairs after long separations, as bond groups have relationships that last decades across long-term, multi-year separations. And we've demonstrated that there are socially segregated sympatric clans in the Caribbean with significantly distinct dialects. So units in the Eastern Caribbean clan here in green produce the 1+1+3 coda. And the EC2 clan, which is red, never produces that coda, but instead produces a really long 5 regular coda. What's interesting is this 1+1+3 is unique to the Caribbean whales. It's only ever being heard in the Caribbean, and it's been identical for at least the last 30 years. Calves spend about 2 years learning to make it correctly. They'll actually babble and produce a higher diversity of calls prior to sort of narrowing down their dialect to be more like their families. But they do learn it accurately, and we think that this is to ensure that the clan can be recognized across huge geographic ranges that they use. So if you think about it, these are calves that live in families that spend very little time together, spread across hundreds of kilometers, and yet they're able to learn this particular call in a very stereotypical way. And they have to because we think that when 2 sperm whale families meet at sea, they need to recognize whether or not you belong to my clan. Because it turns out that sperm whale families in the same clan will spend time together, while families that speak different dialects from different clans won't spend any time together. But for any vocal recognition system to work, it needs 3 different things. It needs signals that vary or are stereotyped to provide that identity. You need receivers that can distinguish those signals, and then you need receivers that respond differently. Now, the patterns that we just talked about show evidence of number 1, right? That there are different types of signals. And the social structure that we see shows that they must respond differently to their conspecific identity, which is evidence of number 3. But one of the big outstanding questions is, do they recognize cultural identity? And to address this, we conduct playback experiments, really the only way of asking the whales what they think. And these are, controlled playbacks where we play one from their family, one from a different family, and a control, which is just some sperm whale echolocation. And we elicited 2 behavioral responses in our first 7 preliminary trials. And in one case, we played a 1+1+3 coda to a family from the other clan, and they almost immediately stopped feeding, which they had been doing for the last 7 hours. And they all surfaced and started to socialize for several hours through the remaining playback sequence, and actually until we were forced to leave them that night because of rough weather. In the other case, which was particularly interesting, we played the same clan coda. We played a 1+1+3 coda to a focal female in Unit F, which is the group of 7 that you guys previously met earlier in the talk. And she responded with a series of 4 decodas, which we've shown is actually the unit level discriminator for this particular family. And the female didn't respond to the control or the other test coda. So in all cases, however, we did find that the animals would inspect the vessel and make close approaches after we did a playback, which suggests that there's generally a response to our codas, and potentially that they're able to recognize voice cues of the animal that actually created that call. So clearly this is preliminary work. It's a small step that can be extended as a foundation of a continued playback experiment. But the vocal response of a unit-specific coda after we play a clan-specific one is really interesting in terms of our social identity hypothesis. So clearly it's the basis for continued work. Importantly, there's only these are only 2 key characteristic codas that allow us to distinguish the clans, but the whales in the Eastern Caribbean make 24 different coda patterns, and they concatenate them into long sequences. So their communication system really provides us 2 different benefits when trying to decode it. One is that on its face, it's quite simple. It's a series of clicks. It's almost binary in that there are clicks and intervals. But there's also complexity in the way that these codas are sequenced and exchanged, which vary both within and between individuals or across behavioral contexts. So we've really only begun to include things like spectral characteristics, and that means there's far more depth and structures for us to look at, and certainly far more than we understand right now. And I just wanted to show you what is a bit of a complex figure, but what we're doing now is delineating clans across both the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. So the top dendrogram here shows clustering of similar repertoires among different families, and the colors show the clans that come out of it. And the darkened boxes below denote the characteristic identity codas that allow us to discriminate them. So these identity codas have been classified using contaminated mixture models, and then discriminated from all other codas based on the presence of it being used by a given clade, but not by any other, and that they're distinct in terms of their patterning in the multivariate click interval space. So there are clear divisions that come out from the 5 tropical Pacific clans and the 6 North Atlantic clans. And this is the progress in another project I'm leading called the Global Coda Dialect Project, where we have data sets from all over the world. And we're looking at estimate the number of clans worldwide so that can serve as the foundation for restructuring large-scale conservation policy, but also in search of global universal codas in addition to these really distinct identity codas. So one could think that these divisions that we're seeing here in the acoustics is maybe datalogical or random if we're not grounding them in some kind of contextual data. And in truth, clans were discovered simply as variation in coda patterns. But we've now grounded these acoustic divisions with social, movement, diet, and behavioral data showing that these clans live sympatrically in the same water, but are socially segregated. And that they differ in a number of behaviors across contexts. And so that means we can build a much more clear picture about the potential function of their codas as markers of social identity. So behavior is really what you're doing, but culture is how you learn to do it. And all sperm whales seem to do the same things. They hunt, they eat, they forage, but they all do it differently. Just as some humans will eat with forks this evening and others will use chopsticks, these whale clans differ in what they eat, how they eat, how fast they travel, where they roam, they differ in their social behaviors, and probably in a number of ways we don't understand yet. And we got to this understanding with these novel technology. Like sound and movement tags being used over the last 5 years, they're
Shane, we can't hear you at all. Now it's just a little too noisy. Maybe try again, or maybe we need to disconnect and reconnect, but try again.
Is it because of the video? Maybe? Yeah, I think it was the video. Let's see if it'll work this time. Can you hear me now? Am I able to speak over the video this time? No.
No, it seems like when you run your video, it also interferes with your voice and then makes the video choppy, it looks like.
Okay, so maybe it is the bandwidth on my end. Are you able to hear me now on the static picture? Yes, okay, great. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. All that to say is that we have these new pieces of technology that we've been deploying on the backs of the animals that allow us to relate their acoustic behavior along with all of the behavior of their movement and depth and pressure and light and so on. And that has been really revealing in our ability to link the sounds they're making to the contexts in which they're being made. And a few years ago, but what that has done, in effect, has enabled us to collect larger, longer recordings, but it hasn't accelerated our ability to process or annotate or extract any of the Codas from those longer recordings. And that's one of the things that has really pushed us towards Project SETI. And a few years ago, Michael, David, Rob Wood, and I, along with a very hardworking student named Peter Burmack, conducted sort of a proof of concept study to demonstrate that neural networks could produce meaningful classifications in Codas, as well as the prediction of social identity, both for individuals and clans. But I'll let Pratyusha talk about that next. So this work has really laid the foundation for what we're going to undertake with Project SETI. And I hope it's clear that these whales and the way that we've approached studying them has produced a platform for making big steps forward in our understanding of sperm whale community. These animals are very different, but in fundamental ways, they're very similar to us. And if we can find deep similarities between their lives and our lives, then how different are we all really? So in the middle of a pandemic and with the climate crisis looming, it can be easy to think that this is an overtly academic thing to talk about whale culture and decoding non-humans. But the take-home message from these whale stories, after listening to them for over a decade, is that we have to go out and build bigger definitions of us. So at a time in history when humans are really at their most divided, if we're going to make a change here and preserve life, we need to find empathy for our neighbors and find ways to coexist. And I think that'll be the larger legacy for SETI. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Pratyusha, you want to take it from here?
Yes, thanks, David. I just have one question. So how much time do we have starting now?
You have a half hour.
Okay. Okay. Shane, I cannot share my screen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to turn that off right now.
Okay.
It's not letting me see anything except for all of your lovely faces. Okay.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm Pratyusha, and I'm a PhD student at
Sorry,
CPA.
Pratyusha, you're in presenter mode. Or we're seeing your presenter mode. Can you switch it to?
Sorry. Okay, is this better?
No, we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Yeah, good.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Pratyusha, and I'm a PhD student at CSAIL at MIT. And today I'll be talking about our first steps towards understanding sperm whale communication. So this work is done jointly together with my advisor, Professor Antonio Torralba, Professor Jacob Andreas, Professor Daniela Roos at MIT, and with the rest of the wonderful SETI team. So this will be the flow of the talk.
Sorry. Okay, now I see the screen. I didn't see it a minute ago. Okay.
Okay, so this is going to be the flow of the talk. We'll briefly first talk about the motivation behind this project, and then we'll talk about the progress we've made so far. Okay, so the first question that we want to look at is why should we study whales? So Shane has already convinced us of how beautiful and amazing sperm whales are, and he's already amazed us with all the wonderful capabilities that they have developed over millions of years. And just adding to that, whales also have the largest brains in the world. Besides that, they have really sophisticated communication systems across large distances, and they have very rich cultures. And adding to that, there's also that underwater, since there's complete darkness, sound is a major mode of sensing, not just to communicate, but also to visualize or like via echolocation. The second important question that we try to answer is why study communication? So communication is a major sign of intelligence, and it tells us about the ability of an organism to compose and structure very complex responses. To really study communication or to discover the presence or absence of language, we want to be looking at these 5 things. The first thing is discreteness, which is the presence of units. The second thing is grammar, which is the rules or the rules that apply over these discrete units to generate sentences. The third one is the presence of long-range dependencies, such that how far behind in the context do the sperm whales really rely on to generate the next sentence. The third one is productivity, which is the ability to create infinite number of messages given the first and the second, given discreteness and grammar. And finally, displacement, which is the ability to talk about things that aren't directly in front of you. Finally, no other animal so far has been proven to have the gift of language or show all of these 5 different things. So our quest really is to see if there are these 5 different things present in sperm whale communication. So now let's look at what these sounds sound like. Is it audible? Okay, so on the left side is the audio playing, and well, on the right side is the wave plot of the corresponding audio. So sperm whales make sounds, or they make click sounds to both communicate and echolocate. But as Shane previously talked about the distinctions between the two, communication clicks are more tightly packed, such as in 1 second here, we can see 5 different communication clicks. The next thing that Shane also mentioned was about the ICI and IPI. And these are terms we'll use in the rest of the presentation. So just a quick intro. So ICI is given a coda, the distance between consecutive clicks. And IPI is if you pick one of these clicks and zoom in, really, you'll see these different pulses. And IPI is the distance between the peaks of 2 consecutive pulses. Okay, now coming to the data that we have. So collecting data with sperm whales is extremely difficult, and the data is very, very precious. And there are 2 kinds of data. One that can be collected by hanging a hydrophone down the boat, and another is this way by tagging whales using D tags. And Shane and his team has collected this really rich data set containing about 4,000 different codas, containing a total of roughly 22,000 clicks. And these are stereo audio recordings. And after that, they've also had annotated them with rich annotations of ICIs and IPIs. And in addition to all this, there's also other metadata mentioned on the slide. And besides this data, there's also additional audio data, but there is no annotations for this audio data. Now here, just do a quick review of the previous work, which is done on this data. So one thing is to look at whether the presence or absence of click. This is done by Vermont et al. And they look at the presence or absence of click in a given image or a spectrogram of the wave. And the way you get ground truth for this is in the paper is via thresholding the signal. And next, they also look at clustering codas across clans and individuals and find these beautiful patterns. And these the different codas seem to be separable across these different groups. Finally, they also look at classification experiments where they do coda type classification, vocal clan classification across 2 clans, and also individual whale identification across 2 whales. So I think these are very, very interesting experiments, and it's a really good start to assume that clicks can be thought of as binary clean signals, as a click or a no click. And also these experiments can then be used to further generate labels for the rest of the data set of about coda type classification, vocal classification, and whale identification. But if you look at what is missing, the same advantage can also turn out to be a little bit of a disadvantage. While treating them as binary signals is a good start, there could be other features that we could be missing out on, such as power. For example, the way we emphasize on different words could mean different things and can convey emotions, which could completely mean different things. Finally, and another thing is there's also simplifying assumptions that could be that are made about the coda types and variations. And the third thing is generalization beyond heuristics. So generalization beyond heuristics, by that I mean that like for the click detector, there's an assumption that beyond this threshold would be a click and lesser than that would not be a click. But actually, in reality, when we look at data, there's a lot of soft clicks, which when we retrain a model using the same approach, the performance drops from almost 99% to 7% on the softer clicks. So what we really want to do is go beyond some of these heuristics. So what is it further do we want to know? So the first thing we want to know is really what are these units of communication? The second is what are the rules that operate over these units to produce different, let's say, sentences for now, but let's see what they really are. Maybe we don't really know what they really are. And the third thing is to see if there are long-range dependencies over the historic context of the sound. And finally, can we learn the meanings of their vocalizations? So what have we seen so far? There are 2 main points that I'd like to take away from the slides before. One is data collection and annotation is expensive. And 2, how do we generalize beyond heuristics? So the rest of the talk is about what we are trying to do and some of our first steps. And the first thing that we want to do is automatically annotate the data that is not annotated. The second thing we want to do is use these annotations that we obtain over the audio data to then find these symbols and rules that govern the behavior of these vocalizations and how sperm whales communicate. So first, talking about automatic annotation. So what we really want to do is 2 things with an automatic annotation. Given this kind of audio data where we have vocalizations from 4 different whales, all we hear is a continuous stream of audio, right? We don't know who that belongs to or where these clicks really lie. So there's 2 parts to this. One, we want to be able to separate out the different clicks and attribute and find out their positions. And 2, we want to be able to attribute them to the different whales. So the first part is identifying where these clicks are. So like you can see on the left is the waveform and on the right is the spectrogram. In the left side, you can see there are some really soft clicks that can be seen more clearly in the spectrogram. And the thing is that we do not want to lose out on these soft clicks because they could actually be responses of the other whale responding back to the previous whale, and they're very precious. And here is some images of noise. And we can see here how some of the noise can end up looking very similar to some of the clicks because this is noise from the microphone and disturbances sometimes are very clicky. So we also want to we do not want to detect these as clicks. So we model the problem of click detection as a regression problem where we take a signal. And what you see here is the green window is the part of the signal we take. And the black window is the window over which we make a decision. So in the black window, the job of our click detector is to tell us where does the peak lie. And by modeling this problem in this way, we also generate a lot of hard negatives. For example, if the wave moves to the left or to the right, the peak is also going to move within maybe the black window, also go out of the green window, where there would be cases of both the click is just outside the black window or there is no click in the black, there's no peak in the black window. And it uses, this is our model that we use to model this as a regression problem. And the output is the location of the peak in the black window. And here we look at some of our results. And while it may not be super clear, I'm not sure, but we can see that there are the clicks marked in red are some of the clicks which were not originally annotated. So not only does this help us recover clicks that are very close by and maybe annotations have been missed for, but also can detect very soft clicks with greater than 96% accuracy, which the other model was unable to do. And here's a look at some more. The second thing was about click separation. So here what we're trying to do is really take 2 clicks and use those 2 clicks to ask the question of whether it's the same speaker, yes or no. And the idea is to recursively use this question to parse the rest of the data set and split them across the different individuals. So when originally IPI is an information that's used to identify and attribute clicks to different speakers. But if we were to just use IPI information and angle of arrival information, we can do it to an accuracy of about 60%. And that's one reason is because IPI estimation for softer clicks, such as the one shown below, can be really noisy because the peaks of the pulses are not very clearly defined. But if we use the raw waveform, the separation accuracy goes up to almost 70%. And then another thing we were thinking of is whether asking this question is too hard and maybe just separating out the tagged whale from the rest of the whale is enough of a question to ask for our experiments. And for that, we get we can do that much better. So we're still iterating over different versions of this model. And yeah, it'll hopefully get better. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the second part of the talk, which is identifying the underlying symbols and roots. So one question that, now that we have a system in place to automatically annotate the data, what we want to really do in the second part is maybe find a way to really break down this problem and identify patterns that repeat by making as little assumptions as possible and find out the smallest unit that describes the data the best. So let's say these are clicks we see here, and they occur in time. So we could probably, according to how they previously visualized, it's either by dashes or by dots, and they're spread over time. But another way of looking at this is that we could use the structure that is found out by all the amazing work that's been done in the community. So there are these Codas, and if we look at these Codas, and instead of placing them next to each other, what if we place them like this? So it looks like a dialogue between, like not a dialogue, but 3 sentences maybe said by a whale. And while what I do next will not really make sense immediately, hopefully it'll make sense in the next slide. What we do next is connect the ith click of the jth coda with the ith click of the j+1th coda. So what we're doing is we're trying to draw lines to see how much these vary. Because traditionally a 1 + 1 + 3 coda can vary a little bit, but how do you decide where to draw the line and if this variation is even meaningful? Right, so what we've done is we went from an audio form to like using existing knowledge about these codas to this representation. And now, if we look at the entire audio file and we plot out these representations, we see something like this. Here, there's a green whale and a red whale. And we see that the red whale is still making a 1 + 1 + 3 coda, but it's varying it very little by little. And then it's increasing and then decreasing and increasing and decreasing. And the green whale also seems to follow. And if all this was really noise, this small variation, then we would not see any of this following behavior. So then why does the red whale really follow the green whale? So I think this was a very important, to us, it was very important that we found out that maybe we should be more careful about the kind of representations we decide to or the assumptions we try to make. We also made a book of whales with all the audio data that Shane's data set had. And these are just some more visualizations just to have a look. It was really fun, like it really helped us understand some of these behaviors a little better. Like we could see some red whale following blue whale, and we could also try to indirectly see, okay, maybe this whale is talking to this whale and this one is talking to the other. There were also like other patterns that like emerged by visualizing it in this way. Like it's known that just before dives, whales make very short and flat short codas. And then we see like these short codas, and even when they make long codas just before they dive, they still have these very flat patterns as compared to the much varying patterns that they make when they come back from the dives or when they're on the surface. And besides this, we also have some metadata, and what we really want to do next is be able to tie up some of this metadata with the audio data we have to understand, to like in some sense contextualize this audio using the metadata. So here we see depth data along with the metadata. It's depth in meters. And like while here there's two things we want to see. One is local behavior of when it's making a sound, how does its local behavior vary? And below you see a larger window where you can make sense of what was it going to do right after. Like here it said something and then it went on a dive. So what we really want to do is be able to understand where it makes what behavior using both the local and the global context. Okay, so the next thing that we want to look at is there's also additional metadata that I mentioned initially. So this is work by Data and Visualization Research Lab on the left side. They have this really beautiful visualization, but what we're trying to do is try to make something similar for our project too, where we have this visualization on the right side of the sperm whale diving in multiple dives. And we're still working on this, and this is just the first version. But what we do see here is these little finger-like patterns on the bottom of the dive is when they dive deep, and then they go deeper to maybe like find food and come back, and then they do that repeatedly. And while they do not really have communication clicks around that area, we still are interested in knowing if those behaviors tie back to something they discuss when they come back to the surface. So another thing is, what are the differences between the codas? So, or what's the distribution of the different codas? So most codas are 5-click codas in the data set that we have. And it's like roughly out of 3,900, about 3,000 of them are 5-click codas, and the rest there's a lesser distribution across the rest. And now another thing to do is, if we were to make the same visualization of the 4-click, 5-click, and 6-click codas, but assemble them in ascending order of their length, we see these patterns on the right. So while you can see a very flat pattern so let's look at the graph in the middle. So while you can see a very flat pattern, like on the left side, on the right side, there's more of a continuum. So how do we decide where should we draw the line? Like what part, is this some kind of a continuous communication, or like, how do we decide where we should draw the line to find out the smallest units that they use to communicate? And just adding color to the previous plot, if we color code them according to where in the dive all these clicks or codas are happening, we notice that this clear distinction between what they say just before they dive and what they say on the surface and what they say when they return. So like it's not very clear from maybe this plot, but towards the longer codas are what they make usually when they ascend, mostly. But there's also like some blue distributed in the middle, but clearly the shorter codas are the ones that they make just before they dive. And there's not much of use of that later. Okay, just coming back to this question of, is when the click starts all that there is to a click, or is there more? So another thing we do is with the same plots, we scale up the radius of the circle depending on the power of the click. So we also see these other interesting patterns of, there is definitely variation, and it's constant. Like, so this variation, is it intentional or not, is something we're looking at now. Next is, there could also be other voice cues. So on the left side is a plot where we take clicks across different whales and just superimpose them on top of each other, and it looks really messy. But on the right side, we take clicks from the same whale and superimpose them onto each other. And it turns out that there seems to be a lot of similarity between clicks made from the same whale. And there seems to be these, so on the right of that is the Fourier transform, and there seems to be these distinct peaks at two different frequencies. And if we take the two principal components of these waveforms and do clustering, and then we recolor the original plots based on the cluster they belong to, we also notice that there seems to be a variation between when they use what kind of a frequency. So it could also be something that could be important that we should factor in when we do any of our future analysis. And this is just a quick video which looks at a UMAP plot of our of the different clusters in the data set. So the lime green colored plots are the 5-click coders. You can see as we walk across them, we can go from the longer 1+1+3 coders to the shorter 1+1+3 coders, and also the continuous 5R coders, and so on. And in the interest of time, I'll just move to the next slide. Okay, so now finally, the question we started out with. So what is the smallest number of discrete units that explain the data distribution the best? So how should we represent the vocalizations? We want to be able to attribute them to what whale, what is the coda, at what depth, how loud, what direction was it probably facing, and at what time. And another question that we want to ask is, should we be thinking of something more continuous, like a more continuous representation? Or should we try to find out these smallest units that still govern, like transitions over which govern how the different codas are produced? And I'm sorry, just to mention one more thing is, like when we go from the representation on the top, which is continuous like music, to discrete like language, we will be missing out on some information. But what we want to do is miss out on the information that does not determine, that is not really information, but is just a factor of variation. For example, when we go from audio or sounds that we make, each one of us can say things very differently, but when we go down to the written form, we try to maintain as much information as possible. So we want to make this transition as less lossy. Yes, and this is a slide which is talking about the same thing. So it is about, like, if we were to use waveform, it's the richest form of representation that we can really get. And the right side is some binarization of this. But what we want to really do is, as we go to a lower dimensional representation, which might be easier for us to handle, but we want to not lose out much information. So what we do is something similar to what Shane was also talking about, is we hierarchically cluster the different coda types into these grouplets. But now the question is, where in this hierarchy should we really draw a line and say this is the number of clusters we should have, or this is the number of words we should have? And for that, we will talk about that in 2 slides, because we tie up that decision with the process of making the next prediction. Because if you think about it, like, how do we decide what are the right words? It is also in some way tied up with the decision of how does this decision help us produce more meaningful sentences, or what is that represent? What's the smallest number of words which can help us predict the next sentence better? And like, if you look at variability within the cluster, it's not it's not that much. It's fairly uniform within clusters. For sparsely numbered clusters, the variability can be a little more. So the next thing that is talking about is, can we build a model that can predict the vocalizations? So here what we do is, the yellow box is the input, the left box is the context, and the red box is the output. So what we do is, given an input and a context, we want to predict what are the next sentences that the whale is going to say. Okay, and what we do here on the right side is a language model, which is a probability distribution over the entire sentences or text. And what we have on the right here, this theta is this is a seek-to-seek style language model, where it encodes the context and tries to predict the output. Just coda t plus 1, t plus 2, t plus 3, and t plus 4. Okay, and this is the evaluation metric we will use for to describe in the rest of the graph. And in natural language processing, so this is called perplexity. And in natural language processing, there's a way of evaluating language models. And So the best language model would be one that can predict an unseen test set, right? So what we really want to do is minimize the perplexity, so we maximize the probability of making the best predictions. Okay, so here are some results. On the left side, we see the effect of context on making predictions. So we see a drop in perplexity as we go from context size 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in a random baseline, like we just take no context, the perplexity is much higher, like almost closer to 20 something. So I didn't put it in the plot, but yes. And on the right side, we look at the effect of model complexity, where there's, we compare it against an n-gram model. And we take an RNN model, an attention model, and it seems like we benefit from using ordering, and there seems to be relations over longer ranges that help make better predictions of what the next coda should be. Okay, so one thing that I left off at previously was how do we decide the right number of clusters? So the decision of making a prediction of what the next word should be becomes harder the larger number of words. And like, for example, if we only had one word in our cluster, the model could just predict that one word repeatedly, and it would just have very low perplexity, right? But what we really want to do is make the problem harder, like by increase the vocabulary size, but at the same time, be fair in our comparison of models across different vocabulary sizes. So what we want, so to do this, we need to turn the model's distribution over high level back into a distribution over the lower level to make all of our perplexities comparable. And I can get into the details, but like if anybody is interested. And the next thing is the effect of the size of the training data. So as we increase the amount of training data, we see that the prediction error in the next coda goes down. So right now we're in a very low data regime, and it's expected that this behavior is expected. But what we hope to do is using our automatic annotation, as we talked about earlier, and the models that we're looking at together to increase the amount of data and increase the power of our models, which will then change, increase expressivity of our models, which will then change this curve completely, and then try to build the best model that can probably capture the distribution over the next, the best language model that we can. Okay, and here is is a qualitative evaluation of the predictions of the models. So on the top is the ground truth, and on the bottom is the prediction. In green is the context, and red on the top is the ground truth, and red on the bottom is predictions. And the numbers there are the probability that the model thinks that this will be the next coda. And so what is simplest for the model? Like in a lot of the data, we see that the next coda is almost is roughly the same as the previous coda. So for a simple language model, all it can do is just keep outputting the same coda repeatedly. But that's not one we are interested in, right? So what we want to do is be able to model for these variations, which is what our language model has been able to capture to some extent. And here are some more examples. And while sometimes, like in the first example, we see that it predicted the ground truth with 0.52, but we don't directly just use the max, the cluster corresponding to the maximum probability. We try to use, we sample from our output distribution. So we get a longer coda there, but it also still across these predictions has a higher confidence on even the ground truth. Maybe, and the probability otherwise for the other one would be 1 in 30, which is our cluster size. And these are some longer generated whale conversations, which seem to capture some variation across the different codas. And this is just the conclusion slide. So what have we found out so far? So one thing is that our visualizations have helped us find patterns of variation within the vocalization, imitation, behaviors of imitation, of following rhythms, and of how sometimes whales interrupt each other, which were sometimes earlier treated as repetitions of roughly the same coda by an individual. So the second thing is with increasing amount of history as context for prediction, the ability of models to predict the next coda also improves. And this is some evidence of non-Markovian behavior in the vocalization. And finally, we can generate good or highly probable responses to sounds by sperm whales, which should help us conduct interventional studies in a more informed way. But yes, these models will continue, hopefully continue to improve as we get more and more data via both data collection and automatic annotation. And the next steps really yeah, this is just a fun slide, but the next steps really is to conduct some of these interventional studies and actually go back and replay some of the predictions back to the waves and see if they respond in ways. And this will also tell us where we should draw the line, and probably will overthrow some of the assumptions that we've made along the way. But yes, I think this will be a way we can decide where we should draw the line across the different, where we should draw the line when we decide what's the most discrete unit. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, really great talk, Pratyusha and Shane.